Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining for the first time, I appreciate your time. Smash the like button if you agree that Africa should start making strategic choices and go closer to partners that provide opportunity and alternatives. It is vital at this time that the current president of this country of Sierra Leone understand. He unpacked in a recent visit to China, looked at how the continent of Africa has come under scrutiny, why Africa is making choices that are relevant for its own development. It is also important that Africa should at this particular time put its own priorities ahead of any other geopolitical partners. Why am I saying this? It is important that Africa has been partners with colonial nations that have schooled the continent of Africa for many years and exploited this particular region for centuries. African countries have come to the realization that there is an important period for them to start looking for areas that they can emerge: healthcare, development, infrastructure, consultancy, improve the environment, agriculture, a whole lot of very important things, science, maths, to improve their society. African students are leaving universities across the continent of Africa on a yearly basis. And you say these countries cannot make choices. The Sierra Leone leader went ahead to look at this particular context and reason why Africa is making those very unpopular choices at this particular time. To an extent, his own country, but his communication was coming from the entire continent itself.
Africa's relationship with China is under scrutiny, and quite a lot of people, organizations, countries are trying to look at this as predatory. I would speak on behalf of my own country and say that we are not fools. We have gone willingly into a relationship that we think is a win-win. We have relationships with other institutions around countries around the world, and that has been going on for a century, and we have not benefited. If we find a new friend and we are trying to work together, of course it will attract a lot of attention, but we just want to be sure that whatever we do is for the development of our people. And I think after so many years of deep cooperation with China, we are getting to understand ourselves better. We are getting to know that you don't just come cap in hand and think that China has all the money in the world or resources to give to you. We have to have ways of interacting so that it is beneficial too, because that is the only way that relationship can be sustainable, by making sure that we exchange services, we exchange other goods and services, so that it becomes a continuous relationship rather than just a begging relationship.
The world has changed, and we all see what's happening. The past 2 months under the current United States of America's president has been chaotic so far, if you're paying attention in the news. From the United States of America slamming the country of South Africa, looking at pulling Egypt from left to right, and at the moment, talking about beautiful Lesotho.
In the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of.
It is a shame that while African countries cannot move faster, don't depend on your geopolitical partners. You can engage them as partners. More important, the United States of America has shown that the continent of Africa, to an extent, might not be very strategic in terms of its engagement. That's why the president of Sierra Leone looked at China, alternative that China produces, the effort that China is making, and why African countries can replicate this to an extent to see themselves from China's own perspective.
I think they are already at display. Like talking about amity, that is true friendship. That is a sign of respect for others. We are not being looked down upon. We are considered as equals at that level. And that is what every human being wants. So when you talk about amity, you talk about respect, trust. When you have a friend that promises and delivers without strings, you know that this is a friend indeed. And so you can trust that friend. So all of what has been used to characterize this relationship are already there in display in this relationship. And that is why it is durable. And that is why it is working.
These are challenging times. Africa is taking initiative across the world, looking at the Russian-Ukrainian war, considering the United Nations. African countries are making an effort to an extent. Does the continent pose challenges? Absolutely no doubt. Show me which continent around the world that does not have problems. Europe is having its own issue. The condescending approach from the United States of America. Europe is feeling the pressure that African countries have been going through for centuries. That's why Germany is pushing back the United States of America and other countries across the world. Looking at Canada, the continent of Africa at this particular stage should only go closer to those partners that have a huge alternative for them. I'm talking about countries like China, maybe Russia, and more importantly, other fringe powers around the world. Russia, at the moment, it has historical ties with the continent of Africa, considering its relationship with a number of African nations when they were fighting for their independence from their colonial masters. It is vital at this time, like the president of South Africa clearly said, if Africa does not move swiftly, it will always be considered as beggars. That's why, at this particular stage, you don't need to be reminded. The president of Sierra Leone has pointed it out. The president of the United States, Mr. Donald Trump, has made it clear that Africa is not of no strategic interest at this particular time. That's why he's talking about Lesotho is unknown. He's looking at other countries like South Africa, slamming them, diving into their internal politics, going into Egypt, telling Egypt on what to do. That's what I've said, that geopolitics is a brutal game. An election has consequences.
The world is changing very rapidly, and we need to be thinking about how we can shift from time to time. And I think the new approach by China is a way to capture the world as it is today and see how China can play a more useful role in the current world. We are quite distracted as a world community. Too many things are happening around the world that are not necessarily good. We have missed our focus instead of paying attention to what can make us better. There is too much misery. Monies are being spent on unnecessary strife around the world instead of paying attention to moving people out of poverty. So the development initiative, the security sector that is being proposed now is actually meant to refocus the world and say, yes, here is the problem that we have, and this is what we should be dealing with.
When a leader of the most powerful nation in the world at this particular time as we talk, China is a very huge country, no doubt, but the United States is interconnected in several ways, and the US does not learn anything from the disgraceful exit in the country of Niger, where it dismantled a drone base that worth over $100 million US. The United States of America failed to understand the relationship between the country of Niger and the US diplomat. This condescending approach is what the continent of Africa does not understand why. That's the reason why countries across the continent of Africa are looking for partners like China that provide them equality, understanding, collaboration, respect to an extent, which is vital at this stage. Like the Sierra Leone president said, every country likes to see countries that respect them and like them. But if you think that the condescending communication will be what it takes, like how the president of France said that the continent of African countries, referring to those in the Sahel, that they were not grateful. That's interesting. It provoked a lot of reaction from Senegal, Chad, and a number of other countries across the continent of Africa that went ahead to remind France that before France became what it was, a number of African nations or countries, soldiers, fought to support France during the wars that were happening during those centuries ago. It is vital to point out that Africa has made significant contribution, and the continent of Africa has reviewed its relationship at the moment that is not working. The president of Chad came out clear and said the colonial partnership is of no use. He country of Ivory Coast, the darling of France in the continent of Africa, said the relationship is not working. We looked at Senegal, questioning France. If you see Senegal's troops traveling or walking across France, would that be possible? That's also clear. That's why African countries are beginning to look at partners that can provide them the alternative. It is important for alternative. That's the new mantra. We want to try something new. The old narratives is not going to work anymore. And despite looking at options to fix the relationship, the disgraceful exit from the country of Niger, and more importantly, South Africa standing against the United States in terms of its condescending behavior in a number of areas, considering South Africa's stand regards to Israel-Gaza war, and the United States of America playing a pivotal role with regards to that particular conflict. And to another extent, you see why South Africa is coming under enormous pressure. That's why African nations will decide to go closer to partners that resonate with their challenges, resonate with their difficulties, resonate with what they are looking for. That's why African governments took initiative. They came under enormous pressure. I'm talking about why the world does not consider African nations to be pivotal in terms of looking for peace. But African countries have demonstrated over and over that they are ready to take challenges and also make sure that they can make their voice heard, not just at the United Nations. It is vital to know that despite all of this, the continent faces its own challenges. The African Union, ECOWAS, all of these major organizations. ECOWAS, for example, is an old relic of itself. The African Union must sit up at this critical time in its history. It is important to know that Africa faces some internal challenges, looking at the war that's going on in Sudan, and also considering what's happening in the country of Democratic Republic of the Congo and the country of Rwanda. It is vital at this stage. Despite all of those difficulties, the president of Sierra Leone went ahead to talk about that. It is so important for Africa to make other alternatives. That's why Europe is standing firm. They are coordinating themselves. Recently, you find the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, talking about Europe to focus on its security because the geopolitical circle has changed. Election has consequences, like I said. The continent of Africa must go closer to partners that help them, that provide them security, that provide them guidance in this interconnected world. Protectionism has become what we all know, and major powers want to eat small powers, as we see. Geopolitical partners are fighting each other at this critical time in the world's history, and the continent of Africa must not make such mistakes. They must go closer. It doesn't matter where the partner comes from, whether it's in Europe. If it's a win-win partnership, engage. If it's in Asia, a win-win partnership, engage. The United States of America at this particular time is losing its influence in the continent of Africa, considering China's presence in Djibouti at this particular time. The document of 2025 that the current administration is focusing on to engage the country of Djibouti. This is going to cause a lot of chaos in that particular part of the world. China has established itself looking at the Belt and Road Initiative. Again, China continues to deliver in the continent of Africa at a scale that the United States can just imagine. Look at different projects across the continent of Africa. Geopolitics does not lie. We cannot change the numbers. The events are happening and we all are watching very closely. China has implanted itself in a positive way. Are these some of these debts going around to say that they are debt trap? Of course, to an extent. However, as the president of Sierra Leone said, African countries are beginning to understand themselves on how the partnership with China will go. What are the areas they need to improve and how to collaborate? Because the continent of Africa cannot anymore rely on aid. The period of aid is over. Use your natural resources to transform your society. The world is not waiting for you. It is clear. The number of pressure, the economic class, the middle class in Africa is growing at this particular time. You cannot wait for Europe to support you. You cannot wait for United States to support you. US has its own challenges. Europe has its own challenges. You should look at your own challenges from a geopolitical spectrum. That the war in Ukraine have not taught you any lesson, then you don't know what you're doing. That the particular pandemic issue have not taught you any other lesson, it means you don't know what's happening. Lesotho is being mentioned in the State of the Union address. It's to tell you, it's not by mistake. These are important times in the continent of African history. It will go down in history that this is the time that Africa African countries succumb to their former colonizers, or this is the time that Africa succumbed to paternalism, that this is the moment that the continent of Africa succumb from a geopolitical partners that use condescending narrative with regards to relationship. This geopolitical environment, we need each other, intelligence, communication, sharing, a woeful lot of things. But again, the big powers are considering the small powers as if they are not significant. From the intelligence perspective, every country provides information. But if others are continuing looking at other countries as in a derogatory manner, as an inferior country, have nothing to offer on the table, I think that is a big mistake. At this particular time, countries across the Sahel have decided that they're going to go their way because the current colonial organization that is a relic of itself, I'm talking about ECOWAS, still thinks that the countries across the Sahel are facing the same challenges that they are facing. Like I've said in previous videos, these particular nations are dealing with one of the most connected countries around the world. I'm talking about France. That's why the enormous challenges in their macro environment warrants them to make a move. That's why they have to make a move. And based on what the global media tells you that these countries are suffering to an extent, that's not what we see. Most recently, the country of Burkina Faso actually have companies that produce electric vehicles in Burkina Faso. So do not listen to an extent. You have to go it alone to an extent to survive. These are survival period in the continent of Africa. Any country that sits behind and say you do not understand geopolitics, then you are making a fundamental mistake in your survival. At this moment, geopolitics will affect the food on your table. What happens in the United States of America will affect your gas at your gas station. What happens in other countries across the continent of Africa will affect your food in Europe. It is important to know that the world is connected, but the big powers are thinking that they can go it alone. Africa should look for partners, and China to an extent has provided that guidance and infrastructure and support that the continent of Africa needs. I want to thank you for watching. Let me know in the comment section if you think African countries should start looking for partners that provide them support and guidance at this critical time in their history. For now, smash the like button, check out other informative video on our YouTube channel. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Have a good day. Bye-bye.